And here we are in the Ways and Means Committee for the, I don't know how many times we've gone on live today. We are, let's see, it's 3:30, March 19th. And we are going to look at the yield bill with numbers in it and words and just a nice complete yield bill. If you could join us, John.
Yes. Good afternoon. John Gray, Ledge Council. Less beautiful today, but the yield bill itself remains beautiful. So get ready to see that. There we are. Okay, so this will look familiar, but there are some updates beyond just the insertion of figures because there is now a reserve. And you're going to see that updated in the statement of purpose, the highlighted language. Bill also proposes to reserve monies within the ed fund to offset property tax rate increases the following year, fiscal year 28. And so the updates are really on page 2 itself. Section 1, we now have a property yield of 9,170, the income yield of 12,576, and a non-homestead rate of 1.698. I'm sure you're going to hear more about that, but you've also seen these figures before, just not in the form of the yield bill. And then section 2 is the insertion of the reserve. This is taking half of the, I think, 104.9 billion applying to this year, and then reserving half. So in fiscal year 27, 52,450,000 shall be reserved in the ed fund to offset education property tax rate increases in FY 28. Commissioner to assume that 52.45 million is reserved under the section is unreserved and unallocated applies to the calculation of the FY 28 yields non-homestead rates. That's just part of the assumptions that need to be made as part of the yield determination when making the recommendation required pursuant to Title 32 on or before December 1st, 2026. That's your December 1 letter. So it's saying reserve this amount and then Commissioner make these assumptions when you're determining the yields for the December 1 letter. And the reserve is considered an authorized use of ed fund monies pursuant to the ed fund statute. And that is it. Everything else remains the same aside from renumbering the sections to account for this new section 2.
In, I guess I'll say like one of the more boring political compromises ever made. Some people wanted 1 year, some people wanted 3 years. And so the bill I'm putting in front of us for vote is 2 years. I understand that it is imperfect for everyone in that form, and that is where we are. Do folks want to hear from Julia before, or do we have questions explicitly for John?
I have a question about all the things in the way.
Yep, please.
So we're carrying a current unallocated unreserved balance of 22. So when you're saying it's 52, is this assuming that we're putting a third into this year and reserving a third to add to that 22 to make 52?
I think it's assuming half, but I will not be best positioned to answer this.
So maybe Julie could explain what happens with 22.
Any other questions for John? Julia, do you come explain things? I think so.
Seems normal for me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Julia Richter, JFO. Do you want me to go ahead and share the outlook, or do you want me to just talk through the answer to the question? Okay, then let me go ahead. No apologies necessary. Then I'm just going to go ahead and pull that up. So the outlook is on the committee page under my name. This is the same outlook that I presented last time I was in here. I know it's very small. So what we're looking at here is What was included in the language that John just walked through is the modeling that you see here in column E. So this is using half of the 104.9 million of one-time general fund to uniformly lower property taxes and reserving the remainder of the 104.9 million for the purpose of going into that reserve he just walked through. I believe Representative Holcomb, you're asking about the 22 million here that's estimated to be unreserved and unallocated education fund surplus at the close of fiscal year 26. And that 22 million is being used also to uniformly lower property taxes in this scenario. So the half construct is half of the one-time general fund monies, but the entirety of the education fund surplus is used to lower FY27 property taxes.
So the total, about, we're doing a one-time buyback of 70, about 72, 75.
52.5 plus 22.33.
And folks, Representative Page joined the Zoom, which is
Ah.
lovely.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I
How's it
hope I
going?
haven't missed anything.
No,
Nothing.
nothing going on here.
Representative Wazazaki, you had a question.
Yeah, so one of the more compelling reasons that I've heard to split half and half or to use less than 105 million out of the general fund is to give the appropriations committee a little bit more breathing room for all the pressures that are on the general fund. But because we would be reserving the other half of the 105, this wouldn't actually do anything to alleviate any pressure on the general fund. Is that correct?
Yes, this
Still taking
assumes
the 105 out of the general.
assumes the full transfer of 104.9 million from the general fund to the education fund. And then it's in the education fund, and then the question is, how is it used? And in this construct, half of that monies are used for FY27, and then half are still in the ed fund, put in that tax rate offset reserve for FY28 or whatever the General Assembly does next year.
Really with a very clear desire to absolutely maximize the amount that we are able to lower Vermonters' property taxes and keep Vermont as affordable as possible this year and next year, because we know that budgets will be even tighter next year. We want to make sure that we are not causing an undue burden next year either.
Just to point out.
Yeah, I just want to, do we have other questions for Julia? And then we're going to have a committee discussion about it before we vote. Yeah.
So Julia, just to point out the balance of the 104.9 is the 52.5. It's on line 29, right?
Yes, so the half of the general fund money that's going into reserve, you see that transfer to the additional reserve in line 29, why it's negative. And then you see that it's going into that tax rate offset reserve in line 35.
For Julia?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So if we're using 75 million this year to buy down tax rate, using one-time money again, what is that likely to do to next year's tax rate right out of the gate? Assuming ed spending is zero increase.
If there is not the same amount of one-time money, then we will see. If you'll recall that testimony, it's like pushing the increase forward one more year.
And how much of a spike ballparking is that if you're using 75 million?
I don't know. I would have to follow up with that.
Oh, Julia, so our average homestead property tax rate would go down a penny or so, penny and a half. And the average tax rate on household income, that would go up a nickel. And then the uniform homestead property tax rate. So if I'm reading on the right line here, that would go down a penny. Maybe not quite. And what, do you know? I guess you don't know what would happen to those rates next year, because you don't know what the school spending would be.
You mean in FY 28?
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah, I do.
Correct. And we don't know what school spending will be, and there's also the other pieces of the education fund that impact property tax rates, like the performance of non-property tax revenues.
But like the
Like
performance.
the performance of non-property tax revenues.
Oh, yes, right. right.
And to your point, I think you are, when touching on the change in rates, I'll remind you and the committee that, this seems counterintuitive, right? Looking at the change in rates, that average homestead rate is decreasing, but we're seeing the average bill increase. Estimated to increase, and that's because the base against which that rate is applied to is growing. So the rate does not need to be as high to raise more money. And that's why we look at the average tax bill rather than the change in rates, because the rates are only just telling one side of a two-part equation.
And Julia, I'm sorry, I should know this statewide adjustment on line J. What is that?
That's the average statewide CLA. So
Oh.
that's from a few years ago. That's what the CLA is adjusted by. It makes it so that the equalized rate, the rates that we're looking at here, end up being closer to the rates that are showing up in people's property tax bills. So this means that the average CLA in the state of Vermont is 70.3%, estimated to be in FY 27.
I think my last question has to do with 1B in the sources. That goes down quite a bit. So this on line number 3 under sources, isn't that the money that some people get back? I mean, we're always saying that 60 or 70% of Vermonters who apply for this on their tax return, they get that money back. So the total amount of what those folks get back is going down by 6 million or so, right?
The property tax credit, that is what you're seeing on line 1B, and you do see that it is forecasted to decrease from 26 to 27. We see that property tax, fewer households qualify for a property tax credit just because of the way that that property tax credits are calculated, right? You have those fixed parameters in statute of the house site limits that 425 and 225 and the income limits. And because property values are growing faster than income, it just naturally brings that break-even point lower and lower, meaning that it's cheaper, increasingly cheaper for more Vermonters to pay based on property than on income, which is why they wouldn't qualify for a property tax credit.
So that's a market question that we can't really fiddle, right? Or can we fiddle with it?
The parameters of the property tax credit are a policy decision. If there were to be an intent to change it for fiscal year 27, you would only be able to change the property tax credits that have already been earned, because that property tax credit is on a lag. So changes to the property tax credit writ large need to be done like a year or two in advance, so that they will then show up on the property tax bills after accounting for the lag.
And changing it creates that balloon problem, which is one of the reasons that we really sort of took apart that whole structure and put it back together in X 73, so that we would be able to change it in the future and be more sort of sensitive to changing economic conditions.
So Julia, I think I know the answer to this, but can you tell us all who benefits from this tax-wise with property tax? Who's getting a lower rate this year than they got last year?
Who's getting a lower rate this year than they got last year?
And who, well, living in the future.
Okay,
Who gets a lower rate next year than got this year? Is it the people who paid on the homestead property tax or the average tax rate for household income people? Or the uniform non-homestead people?
so thinking about fiscal year 2027. The average tax bill is going to increase across homestead, non-homestead, and income by 7% if the yield constructs that John just walked through and what we're looking at here in column E are passed into law for fiscal year 2027. And we have no further updates. Of course, we will have more updates.
And in every scenario that we have in the yield bill, the average bills are gonna go up. Because spending went up, even though spending came in lower than we expected, spending went up faster than the other revenue sources grew. And the property tax is sort of the one way that we pay for education that is able to be more variable, even though it's a big responsibility for Vermonters.
The other piece I would also add, is that this is an average. So it's not going to be that everybody's property tax bill is going up by 7%. You will see folks who experience I'm just assuming, you're gonna see folks that experience a decrease or a very small increase that's lower than 7%. And you'll also see folks that are experiencing an increase in their property tax bill that's larger than 7%. Because of all of the intricacies within the ed finance system in Vermont, it's hard to get into how each individual taxpayer is going to be impacted, which is really why we're looking at an average, and it really is just that, an average.
So I remember before Christmas time, you and I had several long conversations and email exchanges, and I really tried not to contact you between Christmas and New Year's. I
Or
hope
you
you noticed that. But we figured out, or maybe I finally got it through my head that thing that my district could do to lower their tax is to reduce their pupil cost, the big number that they vote on, or stop losing pupils. Because our student population goes way down. This year, they lost 38 children. And nobody was mad. They just moved out of town for jobs. And we have a pattern in our town that when the students get into high school, the families tend to move to the town because we don't have a high school. They move to the town where the kids are going to high school. So typically we lose students. And because people are having fewer babies, there's fewer little kids coming up. So our student population goes down. So anyway, I remember that. And I think of that every time I look at this sheet here. Okay, they could reduce their student spending, and if we could have people move into town, that would help. We here can't control that here in this bill and this from 45. Or can we? Is there anything we can do to help either of those things? Because
That's beyond me.
no. This is really in the hands of the voters,
Right.
the people who pay tax.
People vote with their feet. do what you-
Am I slipping into my Northern Vermont vernacular? I know, I heard myself say that. Oh, no.
It's down fine to me.
That was helpful. Thank you, Julia.
Further questions for Julia?
And we're going to start seeing potential impacts of CHIP on revenues. If they appear.
I don't know. I'm wondering if John knows. Otherwise, I would need a phone. Ted.
I don't know when that would start. There can't be. There's this point then, right?
Some were submitted, I just don't know when the approval begins and for what. I assume the first ones are for next fiscal year.
I don't know.
Did you say Chip?
Yes.
Okay, I know the answer to that. Cause I've been asking Ted about it about every 2 weeks. Cause I've been watching how much money is being spent out of the ed fund, being diverted from the ed fund.
We can get an update on CHIP in the next few weeks from Betsy.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Julia? Yes, Representative Lynn.
So I'm not sure of the number, but the last estimate that we got, there was 8 school districts that haven't sent in their budgets yet. Because it doesn't really matter. I guess my point is, whatever that number is, let's say, how much would it have to go up or down, not necessarily down, up, to make a change in this? How would that affect that dollar amount for the non-homestead right off the bat?
Well, about 14 million is a penny on both the homestead and non-homestead rate.
Yep.
That said, in theory, every dollar impacts things. In reality, because the education fund is so big, that once we start to get into, $1 million or more, that's when we start to see a potential impact. The reality of the situation is, like, when you look at us solving for the yield, and we've been asked to solve for uniform average bill change, what you see here down on the very bottom line is how close we can get to zero without having the education fund in deficit. So technically, in column E, we're estimating about $830,000 unreserved and unallocated in the education fund. And that's just because there's nowhere to put them and maintain a uniform average bill change. I will also say that with respect to the school budget updates, the information that we're looking at here is still the budget data from February 21st from the Agency of Education. And that's because, and this is what we do every year, around when this committee starts really thinking through yield bill decision, we freeze the data so that so that you can look at different scenarios and not try to keep up with how data has changed. So it doesn't have the data updates that I have received since February 21, 2026. When this bill makes it into the Senate, the first thing that I do in the Senate is I come in with the updated data and they see the impact or lack thereof.
Which is
Thank you.
why every yield bill, except for last year, I think in the history of yield bills, had to go to had to be sent back here and or go to conference, right? And then the districts that we hadn't received the budget data yet, there was still like an amount booked for those, right?
Yeah, thank you. So we are including an estimate of all school district budget data here. That's what's captured in the 2.075 billion that we see in the education payment. What we're taking here is the school budget data that AOE received and shared with us as of February 21st, or the December 1 letter budget projection.
Thank you.
If hypothetically, we were going to use the 75 million to hold reserve for construction, what would that look like? And how would we carry it
Instead of using it
for a buy down?
So that would be, we don't have that on this sheet. The closest would be what you see in column B that assumes no general fund one-time money.
I'm not, no, or any number. Where would it be carried? How would you specify that? I'm sorry, it wasn't clear.
Oh, like if you were to put money aside for school construction within the education fund, I would make a new line number 36 that would say whatever the reserve
Construction
was
reserve.
was titled. That said, it wouldn't, what we're not seeing here is the school construction, a special fund or whatever it's called, that was created in Act 73. This is showing dollars that have sort of been fenced within the education fund.
So you could also, I think what you're saying is you could also just put it into the construction special fund that was created.
Yes.
Any other questions for Julia?
Yeah, so Julia, which row? You assumes the full 104.9 million.
So column C is showing the, if the 104.9 million of one-time general fund were to be used in its entirety to lower property taxes in fiscal year 2027. So you see that uniform average bill change of 3.8%. That also uses all of these columns use the 22.33 million in ed fund surplus to uniformly lower bills as well.
Thank you.
That's column C.
Yes.
Any other questions for Julia? Thank you, Julia. I just wanna, I mean, there's like no one here. I have no idea if anyone's even watching the phone, but I just wanna say, like, we get really lost in the numbers and the columns and the rows. And the impact on property taxpayers. And the yield bill represents like a pretty extraordinary thing that Vermont does, right? We like trust local communities to figure out how much they need. And then we fund it, and that money goes to support our kids and their education, and like in doing that, our democracy and our economy. And almost all of this money gets spent in our communities locally, and that's also an extraordinary thing. And so I think whatever decision we make, and I imagine that everyone is uncomfortable with all of the directions of the decisions on the table today, and I don't want to speak for you, I'll say I am. I don't think there's a perfect path forward here, but the money we're spending is some of the best money we can spend, as hard as it is for many of our taxpayers. Yeah.
I agree.
So I think maybe we should take like a 3-minute break, and then we can come back and vote if folks are ready.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Woody.
Woody, are you
Still
okay?
there?
Are you okay with a 3-minute vote, a 3-minute break?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I'm going to call, probably Mark to talk to
Okay.
him briefly.
Okay. We could even
Um,
leave you all in the room and well, yeah, okay.
No,
We'll
I-
go out live and take a break, and you hang out, Woody.
but I need to know, Mark,
Woody.
if the number to call you,
Woody, you just stay there for just a second, okay?
We're gonna leave the room.
Yeah, we can leave the room. That's one way to do it.
It's live.
no, I can call